look on TV, and he looks over and he goes, "Ah!" And I'm like, "Oh, what the fuck?" And we both just laughed our asses off and thought, like, now what the fuck could anything that stupid be about? That's silly and really unremarkable at one level and totally hilarious at another. He drags around weird. He gave me something the last time I saw him that I hurt over leaving behind to this day. I can't tell you how much struggle I have done with it. He gave me a dissertation on imaginary languages that was filled
That he
with...
did?
No, that he found and had reproduced and gave me his copy
Who
of.
originally did it? Who knows?
Some academic that I...
Imaginary language glossolalia?
Yeah. No, in alphabets.
Oh,
Just like the language that
written,
does xenolinguistics.
like
that
like Tolkien creates or something, creating a language, yeah.
Things that are described on being on the sides of UFOs, imaginary languages that crazy people make, outsider artists create their own alphabets. And it was just staggeringly rich. And I put it right by the door, and we stayed up all night smoking pot and doing his machines. And the next day I was barely able to get a cab home, and I left it at the door. And I was like, got on an airplane the next day and never saw it again. I'm sure he gave it to somebody else. Yeah, that's an area I've always been interested in.
Imaginary languages?
Yeah. Because I see some languaging in the DMT space. And
yeah, characters?
Yeah. I have this recently recurring thing where I see, in the breakthrough state, I see these swarms of three-dimensional... Studying Neoplatonism, I think they possibly are two four-sided pyramids together to create diamond cubes. And they interface easily, their facets. And any one of them that's fed attention can bloom into... They're like imaginal cells of the mind. They can bloom into anything you can imagine. A brick, a poem, a creature that hasn't lived yet, a creature that lived a long time ago. And there's this interactive volition between observer and them. They're like quantum... That's what I think the self-transforming machine elves are. They can be anything next. And the next one that emerges out of any rotation or just action it makes just spews out more of them. And they start cohering because they're all about attention. If your attention's there, it just gets richer and richer and so fast that you can't even notice it happening. But I think if you do DMT a lot, and I've not done it a huge amount, but I've done it dozens of times, on top of having done LSD a lot, I think you can surf that. And I think you can begin to evoke things. Terrence taught me it was all about acoustic driving when you're on DMT. Like he said, if you ever get afraid, if the terror thing ever comes in, think of some comforting word and just say it out loud. And the only time I've ever had is moment of slipping into terror, the first megadose I ever did. And as soon as it started, I was just curious about it. And when I saw that it was overflowing again, like all the rest of the DMT world, I said, comfort. And the goddess immediately was woven out of the chaos, and a little golden teardrop came out of her eye onto this little porcelain dish into a alpine lake scene that I could see into the water and go down into the trout. And, it just became this completely different thing with one word, and I was like, great, I trust that advice.
Yeah.
And now if I have any kind of thing, I just breathe deep. McKenna suggests singing also. If you can pull it together to sing for even the slightest moment, you're all good.
Yeah. He also recommends smoking a bomber. If you're in a difficult space, he said sing.
Who did?
Chant. Terrence.
Yeah, well, that's...
Sing. If you're good with navigating cannabis, smoke a bomber if you're in one of those places. And he also said you can use a rattle.
A
Those are
rattle.
the 3 recommendations for difficult
That makes
places.
sense, because that engages your body and it has a slight, elasticity to time. I can see that being a good,
You spend a good bit of time with Terrence?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, for 4 years, we moved to live right down the trail from him. And,
In Maui? Or the Big Eye?
No, this is back before the divorce.
In Marin?
It was in Camp Meeker. I think is that Sonoma County or Marin?
Sonoma? Oh, yeah.
It's near the Russian River.
Uh-huh.
near Occidental.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in this tiny little town called Camp Meeker that used to be a summer camp. Literally had a sign made out of sticks over the Bohemian Highway, which is the road that went through it. The other side of the Bohemian Highway was the Bohemian Grove.
Right, yeah, I've swam behind that in the river.
So there was constant shit in the air that you wouldn't believe. Things that have no good explanation.
Energy-wise?
Not just energy-wise. I got up one night, I had a cat that would wake me up at 3 in the morning to get fed. Kind of a feral cat that we had adopted. And I kind of liked it. It wasn't an issue, but it got me up one night and we were living in the outskirts of Petaluma, looking up to the west coast through my kitchen window, having fed the cat. And there was a very tiny amount of fog that had come in between us and the ocean. And between us and the ocean was a giant Coast Guard base that was over a mile from the coastline. It wasn't on the water. Mm-hmm. So it was this big institution that had miles of land around it to if you tried to drive into it, you were on single road for several miles before you could get to it. It was clearly a major security place. And they called it the Coast Guard something. Right. So I'm out looking toward the coast, and I know they're in between me and the coast. They're right on the edge. But I'm not thinking about them, and I see this like lightning, but except it came from the ground. Just like a... And it caught my attention completely, and then another one.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck? So there was a little bit of a pause, and the fog's coming in a little bit more, so you can see a little more of it. And then they go into this insane lasers going off a million a second. It was like, what in the fuck? I read about later, there's a thing called Brilliant Pebbles that Reagan funded under the Star Wars thing, and it was a way of shooting lasers through mirrors to knock out satellites and incoming, weapons. And I'm sure that's what this was. I'm totally positive, because I couldn't even get close to putting my head around it any other way. And when the fog got a little close and you could begin to see it pretty well, like way up in the sky, they cut it off, and I never saw it again. Another night, my wife and I were asleep, and this big storm came up, and no storm was on our radar, and we weren't thinking about a storm. So there's this huge storm, and we were under these giant redwoods, and sometimes they're dangerous, under. And we were got up to just kind of be there. We hadn't really been in a big storm like that in the redwoods, and we looked up, and the sky was completely clear. We could see the stars and the night sky completely clear, and we're like, oh, that's weird. And from the Bohemian Grove side of the direction of the creek we lived on that went to the Russian River, this gigantic blackness covers the whole valley we're in. We're down at the bottom of the creek, and you can see its edge just obliterating the stars. And it's totally silent, and it seems to be an object floating over that might be like a mile wide. At least a half mile. It's hard to tell because we're in this area. And it's totally calm when it comes over us. Everything just drops to total calm. And we're just like, holy shit. We've been talking. Terrence had an experience like this with almost the same kind of thing on another night tripping with friends, but he was in Arizona or somewhere. Someplace not near home. But he had had all sorts of experiences from living there that were, similar kind of probably weird technology. And we had always seen, streams of black helicopters and things carrying people in and out, I'm sure. But the other stuff was prominent in the local folklore about things that people saw and didn't know what they were. I think just pure weaponry systems. I don't think it was anything exotic. I don't know. I mean, at this point in my life, I don't have any more of a clue about what UFOs are than I did when I was 12, other than the psychedelic part of it.
You were going to talk about fairies, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. The way I got into fairies, I had no interest in them or exposure to anything about it. It wasn't in my family or anything. I had a lover that I was with for 8 years, and we used to do really intense megadose LSD. Are we still recording? Do you want to record? I'll tell you my fairy story.
Yeah,
yeah, okay. So the issue is, where did I get interested in the fairy realm? And I was saying that I came from a background that didn't have any kind of blatant fairy influences other than Disney and things that I saw on Saturday morning TV and little girls and things like that. But I'd never had an interest in it, and when I was at the end of my graduate school years, I had a lover that I was involved with for like 8 years. We were very intimate and knew each other very well, and our relationship had grown around a lot of very intense psychedelic experiences with both sacred plants and LSD. And we were very comfortable doing megadose LSD trips. And one time when we were doing a very high doses, we were engaged in a little bit of tantric sexual engagement and embrace, and we were trying to, we were synchronizing our breathing and gazing into each other's left eye and holding that gaze. And it was just like a popular hippie kind of folklore thing to do at the time, I think. And at some point, while we were tripping so intensely and looking in each other's eyes, we were given permission to go to another place, but it told us that it was on the condition that you had to go with someone else. You couldn't go there alone. You had to have a lover. You had to go as a pair of lovers. And we went to a realm that eventually we started associating with the Celtic fairy realm because we didn't really have much to compare it to, and there were elements of it that reminded us of stories we had heard. And my partner had been involved with fairies as a little girl a lot. She had been in the woods with nature spirits and had had very vivid experiences with what she thought of as fairy creatures. So we might have well been accessing a realm on her, from her lineage or her DNA or something, or mine. But I would suspect it's more likely hers because she was clearly a fairyish person. So we started going to these realms repeatedly, using LSD and Tantra to slip into this other realm together. And we would share our time there, and we would share the time there with other beings, and of course it would be very complicated and tricky to explain what that was like. But it involved things like sharing meals and sharing, celebrating different times and gathering in specific places to be with other beings in this realm. And they seemed to be immortal in some sense that was initially had to be kind of considered. They seemed to be able to move in time with the agility that we move in space, where it's quite easy for us to just get up and move across the room or get on an airplane and move across the planet. They were able to move within those kind of small framings of space with the dexterity that we can move in physical space. And this had all sorts of implications. One of those implications was that they were sharing this planet with us and that they could stay out of our perceptive realm by being slightly shifted out of our current time, but that they were able to observe us quite easily while they could be invisible or present when they wanted to. And that had opened up a lot of interesting doors for us to consider, and we went to these places many times, and we both got very profound understandings of how our lives could unfold in a way that was relevant to serving the planet and trying to disengage the war machine that was threatening to kill our planet. It changed our lives dramatically. I basically dropped out of graduate school in part because there was no way for me to contain that kind of experience in an academic field like sociology or anthropology. And I knew that there were a lot more people doing this stuff in California than there were in Texas. And I couldn't find anybody in Austin to really talk to me about this stuff from any place of experience. I wasn't meeting anyone that knew anything about it. So my